think the main changes that are going to impact our workplace are social, technological, and environmental. Social, because we have a very wide age span of young people with new expectations and older people with special needs. Technological, because we have a lot of wireless and digital technology which is going to enable configurations of space and time that we've never seen before. And environmental, the climate change issue and the sustainability issue is not going to go away.
There are clearly some generational trends. I have, a son just entering the workforce now, and I was talking with him. He seems to want to work in what is increasingly being called the gig economy. No structured job, just a series of gigs, if you will, a series of part-time employment opportunities.
So I think you're right. Most people would rather work for themselves or work for small organizations. And you're going to see much more of that begin because of technology and the change in social values that you're talking about.
People like variety and motion and movement in their jobs. They don't like to be stuck in one place all the time doing the same thing. It's pretty clear that people are now working more or less all the time, working at home, working in Starbucks coffee bars, and so much more of a mix of work and so-called home life.
Well, one thing is really interesting is we still have this idea, and this was something that it's never proved, is that you can work at home, that you work for a firm, but you don't have to, the death of realists, the death of distance. There was a popular book with that title, that we called it hoteling, that you don't really need an office, that you could work at home, that it doesn't matter where you work. This turns out to be absolutely untrue. It does matter where you work. Your physical surroundings influence you quite a bit. The Chinese are right about that in feng shui. But also, you don't learn anything when you're at home. You could learn about your dog, and you can learn about what your wife's cooking or what you're cooking, but you don't really learn from your colleagues. And people think, well, yes, you can, because they send you memos. Anyone who thinks that has no idea what learning's about. So they're getting a reversal of that, the idea that you better come to the office now and then.
We have done some work suggesting that knowledge workers who are better networked tend to perform better. So obviously workplaces can either facilitate network connections or they can hinder them, and so that's a factor as well. We know that knowledge workers who are engaged in their work and stimulated by their work tend to perform better. I think the workplace can add to that. We know that knowledge workers who have strong friendship relationships at work tend to perform better and stay longer at organizations, and the workplace can either hinder or facilitate that.
When I was with IBM, I mentioned that there wasn't one IBM executive, and there were 2,000 of them, I was one myself, who ever got that job and didn't have an office, wasn't in the office a lot. They just were home and they got promoted. No one gets promoted that way, and no one learns much that way. Or even people who seem to be exemplars of individual effort. Steve Jobs at Apple, Thomas Edison. It's not true. Einstein, my father used to tell me, he was all by himself in Switzerland in 1905 and he wrote these equations. Einstein knew all the other physicists who were working on these issues. They were always writing letters to one another and meeting at conferences.
Today, after the dot-com boom, the world is loaded with dark fiber that's being lit up to bring us broadband. The first internet was a read-only web, brochureware. Second internet that we're experiencing today is read and write. You can put your stuff up at YouTube, you can do a blog. The next level that we're building now using cloud computing is going to be read, write, and execute. And it won't be just transactional processes, straight through processing. It will be how we actually communicate and collaborate.
There's a great deal written now about wikis and blogs and Web 2.0 and all these social computing tools, which are ubiquitous and universal. I just think it's a lot of noise, sound and fury indicating nothing, as Shakespeare said.
There's an incredible energy around these technologies for people who get it, for people who understand that this is a way for you to maintain a network of connections to people that you know and that you want to continue to know over time. They understand the value of this, and so they're willing to put in the time, perhaps during work, for sure after work, into things that enhance their ability to perform at work. That ability to rapidly pull together colleagues, tap them for their expertise, perhaps involve them in small amounts of collaboration on an as-needed basis. They see that as the basis for their success in the future, and that's very different from the resources the company hands you or tells you you're allowed to use. And so each new wave of technology creates this new functionality, and then people and managers have to figure out how they will appropriate that, what the impacts will be, and in what ways it can change how they compete. And that's what we're seeing now, a lot of new technologies coming along, and people saying, why, I don't really want people messaging me all the time, but they don't really understand that there's a different use for that that's actually quite effective beyond what they're used to. So I think we're at that cusp now where the IT brings along new functionalities that could be tremendously important, and for those to happen, we have to shift our perspective on the way that work is organized, as opposed to trying to ask how can those technologies enable exactly the same behaviors which other technologies did in the past.
Unless you change the processes, unless you change the authority patterns, unless you change the incentives of how people are rewarded, that stuff is just a lot of noise. It's fun, it's interesting, I use them, you use them, but it doesn't change anything in a substantial way. It doesn't change the way knowledge flows. It may change who speaks to whom, but in terms of the real structures of the organization, it doesn't change them. And if it doesn't change that, it's just a lot of stuff without great impact.
I think they're very good for social activity, but there's not enough evidence that they can help you do your knowledge work more effectively yet.
I think the neat thing about new technologies is they always help us be more productive in our downtime, in the time in between meetings and in between formal obligations. Now we can be extremely productive in those times, whereas in the past that was less possible. So there's a real limit to the amount of collaboration you want people to engage in, and I think one of the challenges is how to effectively prune back some of the things that you're doing that aren't that impactful. And to me, that's as big a challenge as trying to figure out the right spots to enhance collaboration within organizations.
Basic philosophy that more collaboration is better is killing us in organizations and as a society. It's implicit in every technology that's out there today. If we just make people more accessible, they'll solve problems and everybody will succeed. It's implicit in all the transitions to matrix structures or things like that. And I think it's going to be a real downfall to organizational productivity. I'm in so many organizations right now where 50% of what we're doing is finding ways to pare back all those unproductive collaborations because people don't know who they have to consult on what decision. So I think that's something that's richly got to be addressed.